Welcome back to Homestead for Life. Today we are going to talk about eggshells and what you can do with them. There are tons of different things that you can do with your used and cleaned eggshells, but we're just going to talk about the main three that we do on the homestead. The first is that we will crush them up into fairly fine pieces and then feed them back to the chickens. These are loaded with calcium. I have read online that people will powder them and add them to their own food or their coffee or their dog's food. Haven't done it, probably won't, but you should bake them for 30 minutes at 250 before you eat them, okay, for you or your dog. Your chickens, not so much. If your chickens are anything like ours, every once in a while they will crack their own eggs and eat them, probably because they're feeling that need. And some chickens seem to prefer it over the oyster shells as well. This is your substitute to buying oyster shells, is to just reuse your eggshells. The other things we do with them here on the homestead are mix them with your compost, with your potting mixes, your potting soils. Calcium, or a lack of calcium, is a cause of blossom end rot. So for your tomatoes, your cucurbits, so zucchini, squashes, those kind of things, your melons, peppers also. So all the things I grow the most of, blossom end rot is caused by not enough calcium. So powdering this, mixing it into the soil, will help alleviate that. And then the last thing that we do with it is we powder it, we crumble it fairly fine, and we sprinkle it over the zucchini, our zucchini plants, because it works as sort of a DE. So your slithery bugs, your caterpillars, your worms with those soft bellies, when they're crawling over it, it's going to cut them up and kill them. Sounds really harsh and gross to put it in those kind of words, but that's what we want. We want those bugs to die because we don't want our plants to die. So it's an alternative to DE. It's a fantastic addition to your fertilizers, and it's great for your chickens. It is an amazing source of calcium. So how do we process it? What I typically do as I'm making eggs is I'll rinse them out really good, maybe soak them in some soapy water, rinse them out, and then put them in one of these Tupperwares, and then I just leave this on the counter to dry. If you rinse them well enough, you don't get bugs or anything like that. They just dry out and they're fine. And then I take a meat tenderizer and I crush them up. This bucket's been pretty well crushed. And when the bucket gets full, I crush them up some more so I can fit more in. Once we have them crushed, I put them in my blender to make a powder out of them. So these are a little bit thicker. They're not powdered for sure. A little bit thicker pieces. These are the ones I'm going to feed to the chickens. Okay. So and to feed these to your chickens, all you're going to do is add them to your feed. Mix it in with the feed when you feed them normally. And that's it. It's that easy. Chickens are pretty easy. The rest of these I'm going to powder a lot more fine. So we'll see how the blender does. I may have to put them in the coffee grinder. I usually just go straight to the coffee grinder. But we'll see how this blender does for us. And the rest of these with the finer grit are gonna go in our fertilizer and on our squash plants to deter those bugs. The finer the grit, the smaller you've got this broken down, the faster it's going to dissolve and work in your soil, okay? The less work has to be done. It's already a smaller piece. So something to keep in mind depending on the state of your plants, and if they need that boost very quickly, you're gonna wanna make sure to powder your eggshells. So my blender didn't quite powder them, but we've got pretty fine here, finer than our coarse mix for the chickens. And this is good enough for what I'm gonna be using it for. I'm not suffering from blossom end rot at the moment, so it's got time to break down. And some of it did powder. I'm not sure if you can see sort of a haze in the air, so there's definitely some egg powder everywhere. So this is gonna work fine for my purposes, both as DE and as an add-in for the fertilizer. The bigger chunks mixed in also make it more of a time release as well, so we'll have more of that calcium getting added in over time. And that's it. That's what we do with our eggshells. There are tons of other uses for them you can find online, but the three things we use them for are feeding them back to our chickens as a homemade DE against worms on our cucurbits, our squash and zucchini and whatnot, and we mix it in with our fertilizer for our tomatoes, bell peppers, and squashes. They're also great in your compost pile. If you're not going to do those things, don't throw them in the garbage, throw them in your compost. One of the uses for our crushed eggshells is sort of a DE for our squash, right? We mentioned that. So to use that, we're just going to scatter it around our squash plants. These are cucuza, so they're not your typical squash. The leaves aren't as sharp and they're kind of a funky fuzzy, but the same bugs do want to go after the leaves. They are a little bit more resistant to squash bugs, which is why I love them. The fruit themselves are so thick-skinned that the bugs don't seem to be able to get through it as easily. So this is one of my favorites here just because it's less of a hassle, and I'm going to put just a little bit more because extra calcium is good for blossom end rot as well. So there you go. That's how we add it to our squash. Thank you for joining us today on Homestead for Life, and please like and subscribe to our channel.